Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 166. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Catherine Raphael about her new epic fantasy novel, Journey to the Heartstone. A longtime fan of the genre, Catherine started writing Journey to the Heartstone because she was frustrated with the skewed portrayal of women in most fantasy novels. They were either the damsel in distress or the evil old crone. So Catherine set out to build a world that showed the breadth of female power. And her main character is a 37-year-old woman who must unite 3 warring tribes and restore peace, all while pregnant. Catherine's own colorful background served her well when crafting her story. She's been an improv actor, a storyteller, a metalsmith, and a jewelry designer. Listen in to learn how all of that eventually led to her becoming a published author. In this episode, I'll chat with Catherine about her writing journey, why it took her so many years to eventually claim her space as a writer, and why she believes fantasy novels give people ways to feel hopeful, as well as a few other things, coming up. Catherine Raphael, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to this.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, Journey to the Heartstone. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Journey to the Heartstone is a fantasy novel about a matriarchal society that has been torn asunder by an evil uncle, starting a war amongst the 3 tribes. I started writing this book because of my frustration with so many fantasy novels that followed a very patriarchal and sexist perspective of women, where all the women were young and beautiful and slight of build. And I was a middle-aged woman of sturdy build. And I was like, why aren't there any protagonists that look like me? All the older women are evil. So I just started envisioning, what would that look like? How could I do this? And the first scene popped into my head, and I thought, well, here's a short story. And it just kept growing into a full-length novel.
And let's talk a bit about your character. So let's introduce us to your main character, Cora.
Cora is a 37-year-old who is recently widowed and pregnant. Her uncle, Evil Vester, had assassinated her parents, particularly her mother, because she was the mother of the Minka tribe, and he wanted to seize power. Cora was 7 years old at the time. She had a younger brother, and they became his wards and basically sent into exile. So 30 years later, she decides it's time to claim her space and retake her place as Mother Minka of the tribe and overturn her uncle, who has been doing very destructive things in their world. She asks for the help of her brother and her mentor, who is an older gentleman who has been the teller of the tribe, the storyteller and spiritual leader. And together they figure out how to bring the tribes together to overthrow Evil Vester.
If I do my math correctly, then Cora, your main character, is 37 when when the book sort of kicks off, let's say.
Yes.
Again, that's a bit of an unusual approach for the fantasy realm where a lot of the female characters tend to be, like you said, either young, on the very young side, or the very old side. What
Mhm.
made you decide to choose this age, say a mature character, to be your lead?
I wanted it to be a mature woman, but she was also pregnant, unbeknownst to her uncle. And I was 37 when I gave birth to my son. So that seemed like the perfect age for my character. There are other characters representing, the older crone with wisdom and a younger female character. So I my intent was to show the breadth of female power in this world and hopefully in ours as well.
Well, let's talk about world building. So you had to create this world from scratch. So let's talk about your influences. What did you draw from? What did you want to make sure was included in this world? What was important to you when you started crafting it? How did you begin?
In thinking about the three tribes, all matriarchal, the Minka, the Dutes, and the Karus, I gave each more strength in body, mind, or spirit, so that the Minka tribe was able to make weapons out of their farm implements. They were better at figuring out construction and mechanical things. The Dutes were body, and they became spiritual healers. They could had an advantage in the war in that they could heal so many of their wounded. And the Karus were spirits, so they had an ability to communicate telepathically. They were able to remain almost invisible, so that even though they were fairly decimated, they still remained alive and hidden. And in creating the world, I wanted to show the balance of those three aspects of which we all have, and how the positive and negative of both of those of all of those attributes. For example, the Minkans were very good at mechanical things, but they also could turn that into weaponry. And the Dutes could heal their wounded, but they could also use their strengths to ensure that other people's wounds wouldn't heal. It was that sort of play with both the positive and the negative aspects of all of the attributes of the tribes.
And when you set out to write this story, did you have it all planned out ahead of time? Are you a plotter by nature, or was this an exercise in pantsing the story?
I wish I were an outliner, a plotter. No, I'm more of a pantser. I guess I had spent a lot of time as a storyteller before I started writing, and one of the lessons I learned early on from my storytelling teachers was know where you're headed, and however you get there is going to be fun. Only tell stories you absolutely love. And I think that was my guiding light in writing this book. I knew where I wanted to end up. I wasn't sure how I was going to get there. And although occasionally I would do some plotting, like, well, I got to get from here to here to here, how's that going to happen? And do some notes. And I did a lot of background on the characters. Basically, I just went for a ride with all of them as they completed their tasks to the end.
And in writing this book, now that it's done and it's out, looking back, was it easier than you expected when you started, or was it more difficult?
When I started writing this book, I hate to admit how many years ago it was. It was always on the back burner because I had a lot going on in my life with work and volunteering. It wasn't until I got engaged with a writers group that I became more serious about, okay, I'm going to get this done. I love this book. I want it to be finished. So it was easier once I made the commitment to myself and to the book to complete it. And from there, the process has been fascinating of asking my writers group to give me feedback, and it certainly evolved over time, and it became its own form of excitement. working with a good editor, it was like, I didn't even think of that. I got very engaged in the post novel writing process of making it and honing it into a book that I felt was exciting and engaging.
Have you always read fantasy and epic fantasy? Is that something that you gravitate towards when you pick up a book, or was this just something this the story came to you and you decided to tackle it?
I have loved fantasy since I was a kid, and I enjoy the possibilities that fantasy presents. We have a new world to figure out, and how do things function, and how do people interact. It's always been a lively kind of reading, not just, well, I know this is a world I understand and everything sort of follows in a line. It's everything's wide open, and I think that's one of the best parts of fantasy, and one of the things that's fun about writing fantasy.
Are there some that are your favorites? Are there any fantasy stories that you tend to reread?
Um, I have read the Lord of the Ring trilogy, in spite of its lack of female characters. I love the Ring trilogy. I love the images of the different ways of living. I have loved Marion Zimmer Bradley's work. There are many writers of fantasy today that are really looking more towards what Gail Carriger calls the heroine's journey, which is, a way of looking at the world a little differently than the traditional hero's journey. And those are the books that I seek out. And I'm totally stumped on what their titles are at this point. So there you are.
Well, when you were writing this book, did you have any goals in mind? Were there messages you wanted your readers to take away? Was that sort of front and center as you were writing it? Or did those sort of things develop once you went back and read it after you had finished it?
I identify with the female characters in this book. And I think, in a sense, I was writing it to affirm my own concerns that, you can be an older woman and still be vital. You can feel uncomfortable in your body and yet be able to move forward. So the fact that it was calling to my own neuroses and helping me heal myself, I hope that translates to other people. I I think that we need to recognize all the gifts and abilities that everyone has, men, women, in coming to take action, and that everybody brings something to the table that can be important and valid and honored. And I hope that comes across in this book.
What led you to writing, to storytelling? Have you always been a writer? Is this something you have always wanted to do?
I actually started my life with a degree in metalsmithing and worked as a jeweler for many years. And when my son was born, when I was 37 and couldn't be in the metal studio very long, I transitioned into doing some acting and some work with an improv company, which led to telling stories in schools and for grown-ups and performance. And through my storytelling, I was invited to write a short story for a local news magazine. And that was the first time I ever took myself seriously as a writer. It was always easier to tell somebody else's stories, but suddenly I recognized I have my own stories and I do want to write them. So that was the beginning of my time as a writer. I think it was hard for me to claim myself as a writer because it wasn't how I started out. And I know some writers that are, you know, very passionate and voluminous in their work. And I sort of felt like I didn't qualify until I claimed my space. The first thing I did was get a business card that had my name and claimed the title writer on it. And then it was like, okay, I'm real now, and I can finish this novel and hopefully get it published.
Well, let's talk about what's on your wish list now. You've got this book, new and out. What's on your wish list for things to do as a writer? Do you have any works in progress, other books you want to write, stories you want to tell?
Yes, I left a space in this book for a sequel. But meanwhile, I've been working on what I thought was a novella, and my writers group has told me that no, it should be bigger. It should be a novel, which is more of a humorous murder mystery. I love the challenge of a writers group. We have, asked each other to do some writing for critiquing, which has led to several different short stories I've had published in flash fiction. So I think that it's wide open. The idea of taking on another big story as a sequel to this feels a little daunting, but I wait for the muse to instruct me. When I get the sense of this is what I want to do and this is where I want to go with it, then I'll get working on that one.
And how did you find your own tribe, your own community of people to support you in your writing?
I was very lucky in that I did a master class at Hedgebrook, which is a women's writing retreat on Whidbey Island near Seattle. And out of that original writing class, my writing group developed. And there are five of us who have been meeting for, oh boy, 8 years now, 9 years now, and supporting each other in our writing process. That was crucial for giving me the space and time to believe in myself.
What has surprised you about this writing journey? I mean, it started all those years ago when you first had the idea for the book, and now this book is out and you're working on others. Has there been anything in particular that has really surprised you, something you didn't know when you first started?
One of the things that has surprised me is that my work in improv and my work in storytelling has helped me develop an ear for dialogue that often my teachers and my peers will say, your dialogue is really good. And to me, it was just something everybody has. But I like to think that I can capture sort of the personality through a dialogue as opposed to other methods. And I love hearing it in my head. I love hearing conversations in my head between my characters and thinking, yeah, that's right.
Well, talk about things that you love about writing. I'm curious, what have you found to be the best part of this writing journey for you?
Oh, that's a good question, Stacy. The best part has been the connections I've made with other writers and my sense of um, my own history evolving from being a metalsmith through performance to putting words on paper. I see this sort of big picture evolution that I'm hitting 75 this year. So this is like long time vision of the path of my life and the people I've met on this journey. I have been so fortunate in the teachers that I've had around writing and the group that I've had to support me, the opportunities I've had in different writers' workshops. I feel so grateful for the path my life has taken.
And what would you say to someone, say, similarly situated? They may have an idea for a story, but writing has not been a part of their life up to this point. Is there any advice you have received that you would pass along to them?
I would go back to the advice I had as a storyteller. Only tell the stories you want that you absolutely love and know where you're going and enjoy the path to get there. And it'll work.
That is good advice. I like the part about enjoying the path to get there because so many writers, especially new ones starting out, feel frustrated along the way at various points along the way.
self-judgment is so available. Yeah, I would hope that that one could be put on the back burner because it should be fun. Life should be fun as much as we can make it fun because there's a lot of darkness out there. So, finding the joy in the journey is such an important issue.
Are you satisfied with the ending of the story in Journey to the Heartstone, or is this the beginning of a series for you?
I am satisfied with the ending. In some ways, I think it was a bit more difficult than some endings, and not everything was tied up with a very pretty bow. And I do think it has possibilities for sequels and developing the characters even more and understanding their next journey. I think that's exciting.
Would you tackle more epic fantasies down the road, either related stories or build completely different worlds? Would you be up for that challenge?
Absolutely. I'm excited to think what might happen next, and I really do trust that I will know it when it clicks in my head, and I will jump on it. Yeah, I think it is an exciting time to be writing fantasy and reading fantasy, particularly since there is so much darkness out there that finding ways to feel hopeful and positive, fantasy suits that, makes that cut for me. So I think it does for other people too.
Good. Well, if people want to learn more about your book and your writing, new releases, things you have going on, where can they go to find you and that information?
Thank you for asking. I have a website, catherineraphael.com. I've got my upcoming media things. I've got some other extraneous writings and links to some of the short stories that have been published, and do my updating there.
And if they want to purchase a copy of Journey to the Heartstone, where can they go to buy it?
Why? On my website, there are links to bookstores, and I have a audio book coming out, so that will be on there as well. So that's a go-to place for everything Catherine Raphael.
Wonderful. Well, Catherine, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, and I wish you luck with Journey to the Heartstone and your works in progress. We'll look forward to those. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and the best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much, Stacy. This has been wonderful.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.